The Wagner Group mercenary force and its successor, the Afrika Korps, have for years played a controversial role in growing Russia's influence on the African continent. According to the report by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, the group has been carrying out industrial-scale smuggling of gold, diamonds and timber. Joining us to give us more insight about that report is Stanyard, author of Mercenaries and Illicit Markets and a senior analyst for the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Julia, very good morning to you and thank you so much for your time. Maybe just start off by giving us context with regards to the emergence of mercenaries on the African continent and what led to this trend.
Of course. Good morning. Thanks very much for having me on the show. So the presence of Russian-backed mercenaries in Africa dates back to around 2017, 2018, when Wagner Group first emerged on the continent. So in the early stages, these mercenaries, brought into African countries. At the time, the role of Wagner was quite shadowy. Not much was known about who backed this group, its relationship to the Russian state, and really what its aims and goals were on the African continent. Over time, it became publicly known through investigations, often by journalists, that this was backed by the oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin, who previously had denied his role in backing Wagner Group and its operations in Africa. Over time, it became more and more publicly known about Prigozhin's role and his relationship to the Russian state. But yes, that all then went in a quite dramatic turn of events when Wagner launched a mutiny in Ukraine, turning back against the Russian state. And a few months later, Prigozhin himself died in a plane crash. That left Wagner's operations in Africa, which had spread to several different countries, sort of in limbo. And in the month that followed, a new body, as you mentioned, under the name of Afrika Korps, was launched with more explicit Russian state backing. And now it seems that these two groups, both Wagner Group in its kind of legacy operations as it operates in Africa, and Afrika Korps have been really working slightly in parallel in some different countries across the continent. And the presence of Russian mercenaries really is also working in parallel to a growing role of mercenaries across Africa that has been marked and noticed by international bodies such as the UN. So while Russia is taking a leading role in this, it is also a much broader trend that we've seen.
Right. And of course, like you mentioned, with the death of Prigozhin, you would assume that the Wagner Group wouldn't have so much might. Which countries are they predominantly operating in?
Yeah, indeed. As you said, after the death of Prigozhin and with the launch of Afrika Korps, I think many people, many observers assumed that either Afrika Korps was just a rebranding of the same group, of Wagner Group, or that Afrika Korps was going to take over all of Wagner's operations. And what we've seen actually really is a little bit more complicated than that. So Wagner Group, under that name and with some of the same commanders, it seems, in place, continues to operate in Central African Republic and in Mali. Whereas Afrika Korps has been, expanding into new countries, sent into slightly different directions, really. So we've seen them deployed to countries including Burkina Faso and Niger. And it's not clear whether this will develop over time, whether they'll overtake and take control of the legacy Wagner operations. But what we're seeing at the moment is that they're operating in different geographies, as it were.
Right. I mean, you make mention of CAR and Mali, and there was once a time where the removal of the Wagner Group within those regions was quite a hot topic. And some political analysts within those regions were speaking about how the removal of the Wagner Group would pose a threat to the country's security. What are sort of the relationships between these groups and those countries that they operate in?
Well, Wagner or Afrika Korps, as its kind of parallel successor organization, they do operate on the invitation of the regimes of the countries where they operate. So, whether that's Mali, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, they have been brought in through an agreement brokered between the leadership of those countries and the Russian state. Often Wagner and Afrika Korps have been deployed to countries where these are highly autocratic regimes. Some of these have been brought in. Some of these are countries where the government have come to power through a military coup, and they are operating essentially some people have used the term as regime survival. They often provide quite close protection to the military leaders, and they're preserving the kind of core of political power in those countries, often as they're facing kind of major security challenges in the form of insurgencies. Whether you look at Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, those areas are facing massive cross-border insurgencies, and that's the immediate need that these mercenaries are brought in to provide.
Right. So the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime released a report, and within this report it speaks about the industrial scale of smuggling gold, diamonds and timber out of these countries. How large is the scale of smuggling of these minerals within these countries, and what impact does it have on those countries?
Mm-hmm. So really with that, we're referring to what's been quite well documented of Wagner Group's role over the past few years in the countries where it's operated. So it operates on a few different levels. Firstly, it obviously has its military operations as a mercenary group, but what's always gone alongside that is this economic impact and economic operations that they have, where they are engaged in smuggling within the natural resources sector. It's quite complex in that Wagner at the time, when it first entered into some of these countries, set up a network of companies and organizations which are embedded in the natural resources sector, whether that's gold, diamonds, in the case of Central African Republic, timber as well. And those companies are set up to pursue these economic goals on behalf of the mercenary group. And then what we've seen alongside that, as well as them using their kind of military might to gain access to natural resources. That was seen in Sudan, where some whistleblowers brought to attention the fact that they'd been using military airfields to smuggle huge amounts of gold. Central African Republic as well as a really key example. But then also on kind of other levels in Mali as well. That's included within their military operations, just straight out looting of communities where they're operating.
Mm-hmm. All right, Julia, very interesting. I mean, it certainly does seem that Russia is growing its force and its base through these mercenaries across the continent. It certainly will be interesting to see where this will end up in the next coming years. Thank you so much for your time. That's Julia Stanyard, the author of Mercenaries and Illicit.